So the potentially biggest tax hike in U.S. history is looming on the horizon, yet Trump vows to make cuts. Are these cuts going to take place? When are they going to take place? Stick around, find out. All right, so I am going to show this article here because this is something that the White House released this week. Here's what happens if Trump tax cuts aren't extended. So here's some of the things that we see in this article is that if Congress doesn't extend the Trump tax cuts, and this was back from 2017, through what they're calling Trump's big, beautiful bill. Guess who came up with that name? Americans will be stuck with the largest tax hike in history at the beginning of 2026. So it's very unlikely that that's actually going to happen because obviously Congress is going to make some sort of decision and come to some sort of resolution involving this. But what is that going to look like? If this resolution is not passed, what we're going to see is the average taxpayer will see a 22% tax hike, equaling $4 trillion altogether. The child tax credit will be cut in half. Guaranteed deductions will also be cut in half for all taxpayers. And small businesses will be hit with a massively large tax increase as well. Interestingly enough, they include right here at the top of this post, White House, this post from Democratic Representative Steve Horsford. He basically said delivering the biggest tax cut in history would screw America. That's his response. So they wanted to make sure that you had that piece of the information at the top. I love how the White House used to be a unbiased source of information, and now it just flip flops every 4 years depending on who's in office.
It's very informal these days. Very informal.
Exactly. The top of the article is an X post. So what is in this? What is in this big beautiful bill?
That says it all.
Yeah. What's in this big, beautiful bill? So I watched this interview with Speaker Johnson, Mike Johnson, this week, and he talked about this bill. Essentially, what has happened so far is the House has already passed the budget framework, which is essentially the blueprint for setting this bill up. And they're hoping to get this bill on the president's desk by Memorial Day, which is the end of May. So some of the things that the bill includes, obviously it includes a lot of the budget for the stuff that Trump actually wants to do over the next 4 years, including illegal immigration regulation, things like that. A lot of the things that he's set up and to do. But also it includes some needed tax cuts because of, number one, this looming tax hike that's coming the beginning of next year. But the other thing we're seeing is that it includes 1.5 trillion in cuts to federal programs and services, or at least that's what's being proposed right now. And these guys, this last week, the congressmen have been up all night, pulling all-nighters, throwing ideas around, trying to figure out and debating, what are we going to try to put into this framework just to get that passed? And then now, what are we going to try to do when it comes to the actual bill? So very interestingly enough, it's actually Mike Johnson who said that we would be hit with the largest tax raise of our lives at the end of this year if this bill was not passed. But another thing he said we have to make sure while we extend the tax cuts, we also pay for them. So that's the other side of the coin, is they're trying to figure out if we're actually going to cut taxes for American people and American workers and potentially small businesses and the like, how are we actually going to pay for that? Are the tariffs going to work? Are we going to tax the wealthiest Americans more? Are we going to tax corporations more? What is actually going to take place? So we're going to throw out some of those ideas today and not throw them out, but, talk about them. So we're going to throw all the ideas out and we're going to come up with Troy's big beautiful tax bill. No. But one of the purposes of the bill that Johnson mentioned specifically was they've got to get this thing passed quickly in order to essentially address some of the short-term effects that Trump's tariffs have had on the economy. So they're essentially trying to send a message to the bonds market, the investors, the stock market investors, and America's allies and enemies at the same time that, hey, we're on solid fiscal ground and we're not going anywhere. And the economy is not as shaky as the left media wants you to believe it is, which is obviously true, but sometimes it's hard to get past some of the narrative. So, which is what we're trying to do in this show, obviously. So they said the next 5 to 6 weeks are very critical for negotiations. And another thing that the left has pointed out, which I don't think the right is talking about as much, is that they believe this bill is also very critical for the midterm elections as well. And depending on how it goes and whether the tax cuts are put in place or not, is going to essentially have a great effect, which I think they're right about it. From a non-biased perspective, it's going to have a big effect on what the midterm elections could potentially look like, as long as other things don't pop up that have a bigger effect. But what's the pushback? So the pushback on this bill, one of the major pushbacks is a lot of people are saying from the left and, critics of Trump are saying that he wants to do away with government programs that are needed. Obviously, things like Medicare, Medicaid. And so he has specifically addressed this issue and said, nope, we don't want to do away with that. We don't want to get rid of Medicare and Medicaid. We need to safeguard these things through this bill. But he said, we're going to continue to follow the same path we've been on, which is to cut the fraud and to essentially preserve the integrity of these programs for those who actually need it, while weeding out the waste and getting rid of the people that are taking advantage of the system and are on these programs that don't actually need it, that either could be working or that don't exist, or that are 107 years old or whatever it may be. So that's where we're at. What do y'all think about where we're at right now, this potential tax hike? Would that be a good thing? Do y'all feel like paying more taxes, or, is it a good thing that they're trying to cut the taxes? And then also, do you think that they're going to be able to do it?
I think that it would be good to cut taxes. And I think that everybody's kind of panicking a little bit because oh, where's all the money going to come from? But I think that there's a lot of people involved in this whole program in the Trump administration who are going to make sure that we don't destroy the country when we do cut these taxes. And I really think that people need to just kind of calm down and let the process play out. And once again, have that more long-term vision on this. It's not so short-sighted as it might seem.
Yeah, I think it's. So I spent 20 years in corporate America, and I think there's not a business on earth that has not had to cut spending that or expenses that maybe they didn't want to cut. And the problem, the non-problem here is that there's a lot of spending in the government that should be cut, regardless of whether there's more tax revenue or not. And so there's just no other thing on earth that can be just, we just need more money and we just keep wasting all of this. And so let's just raise taxes. And you have to actually produce value, or you have to actually do something that makes sense. And so for me, it does make sense. Like put the people in the corner and make the difficult decisions. And a lot of them, like I said, they won't be difficult. And so we just really need to tighten up the fraud, like when I was in high school, I remember I had a friend that, got unemployment, and what he would do is he said, I just have to go in and prove that I did an interview every other month, and then I can only get it for 3 months at a time. Then I got to go 3 months without it, and then I can go back and do it again. So there was actually a limit back then, and he was still gaming the system. But the thing is, that's happening today. But there's no, they turned off the you got to have some time without receiving it now. It's just like a perpetual thing now, and they incentivize single parent households and all kinds of stuff. And so there's lots of problems. And so yes, I think we need to cut the taxes as much as possible, and then let the dust settle, let the chips fall where they fall.
I'm a huge proponent of no taxes. I really can't stand them.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm quite as optimistic as Doug's perspective, as far as just like trust the Trump administration and just like it's all going to work out or whatever. The reason being is because it's very difficult when you live in a republic where you vote in your people and they have to be popular and they have to remain popular and they have to stay in office in order to get things done. Because like we're talking about the midterms coming around, if the populace decides that they don't like what the Republicans are doing for whatever reason, whether good or bad, then we could swap, and all of a sudden we don't have a Republican majority in Congress anymore, and we can't pass laws anymore. Trump can keep doing his executive order thing, which can get blocked by judges. And we've seen that left and right. And also it doesn't have any standing power because the next president comes in and wipes out those executive orders, just like Trump wiped out Biden's executive orders. So if we're talking about like long-term strategy, unfortunately, we live in a system where that's actually very difficult to implement. And I was just looking at our debt this morning. We're currently $36 trillion in debt, and we have over $1 trillion deficit every year. I was watching some videos on this the other day, and it was some analysis from some more like libertarian-minded people, and it was interesting to see libertarians talking about we actually need to raise taxes because usually libertarians are all about cutting taxes, but it's only in the sense that most of our not most, but a large chunk of our spending is being spent on interest payments. And so if we were going to get ahead of our deficit, we actually have to clear out some of our debt and get ahead of the interest payment, which can happen in two ways. Either one, we start paying more money every year to like wipe out our debt, or we grow the economy greater than we're currently growing the debt, obviously. Now, maybe we could grow the economy faster. I get cutting taxes to grow the,
but I think that's kind of
economy. But the issue is that we have such an enormous debt that it's like, can we just cut taxes and cut spending? That is not going to clear it out. And I think that the math is a little more difficult than that. I think there may be some cases where we actually have to, or we have to bring in more revenue somehow if we're going to clear out the debt. Because oftentimes what Republicans have done in the past for several decades is they've been like tax cuts, and yet they've never been able to balance the budget. We've never been able to get under to remove the deficit. We've never been able to remove the debt. And so if they're saying right now they want to do tax cuts, they want to do more tax cuts, and then they're like, and then just magically we're going to clear out the debt. It's like, okay, I get that we're pushing more, and maybe that's enough, pushing more to cut out the fraud and stuff, but I don't know. I'm not optimistic that is enough by itself. But please chime in. I was
going to say, there's a Warren Buffett gave years ago. I heard him speak, and he said, I have a very simple thing that will guarantee we always have a balanced budget. If the balance, make it so that the nobody is eligible for re-election if the budget is not balanced, and we will have it balanced in a week. Like literally, that's all has to be done. And so for me, saying, oh, just give the government more taxes is a little bit like a child, a young adult that's addicted to drugs and asking their parents for just a little more money so they can finally get off the drugs. Like, it's just kind of like,
see how well that worked in California. There's a literal metaphor there with like, oh, we'll give them the clean needles so that,
it's absolute insanity. So, I mean, I just think more money is not going to solve a problem of overspending. Like that never, like you see people win the lottery, they were poor. Within a few years, they have the same financial issues because they don't manage the money well. And that is the problem that needs to be fixed. It's not a lack of money. It's overspending. That's what.
Which is one of the things that we're obviously Doge and, the Trump administration is trying to work through right now is not just cutting taxes for the American people, but cutting the actual unnecessary waste and spending that's taking place just throughout the government. So here's a few options. I want to throw a few options out there that have been proposed for actually being able to pay for tax cuts. How do we cut taxes? Because that's the question we're talking about. How do we cut taxes at the same time that we're trying to do all these other things, and pay down the national debt and, keep everything else working. And the first option, obviously, Trump has suggested this many times, but he has suggested that tariffs could replace income tax. He was interviewed by Fox host Rachel Campos Duffy and a couple weeks back, and she essentially asked him that question. And he said, you're the only one who's asked me that. So it was kind of a funny response. But then he said, there's a chance that it could, and obviously, we're all taking that with a grain of salt. He doesn't know the future, but that's his personal opinion on it. And one of the reasons I believe he's doing what he's doing. But if y'all want to, for those listening live or after the fact, if you want to know what we think about tariffs, we've done 2 live streams of tariff discussions over the last couple of weeks or the last month or so. So look back at our previous live streams, and we might get into a little bit of that here, but probably not too much. Here's option number 2, and it is Republicans are considering raising the top tax rate to 40% to help pay for the other tax cuts. So this is something that gets into some interesting weeds. Reese, you brought it up a few minutes ago. How do the Republicans keep the populist vote, and that middle voter block, and how do they keep enough people happy to stay in office, if they are essentially raising taxes on people or doing what they told their voting block that they weren't going to do, right? And traditionally, so I'm gonna show y'all some of the data real quick, because I think this is gonna play into this conversation a little bit. So who pays federal income tax? So this is right now. Let's see if I can get this a little larger here. High income taxpayers paid the highest average income tax rates. Obviously, that is a very very smart title right there. But you look at this is back in 2022. So this, the data is a few years old, but this is the most recent data they have. So bottom 50% here, they're paying 3.7% of the taxes, right? And then it goes up from there. Then you've got 7.7%, 10.7, 14.3, 18.3, 18.8. And then, so this was 2022. And the jump is the bottom 50% is paying 3.7%. Top 1% is paying 26.1%. So we've already got this huge delineation here. And it's funny because there's two tax terms. One is, I believe it's a tax fairness or something like that. And another one is like tax neutrality. And one of them is illegal and the other one is not. Like it's very weird. So we're gonna be neutral, but we're not gonna be fair. Essentially, is how it works. So this is tax neutrality, but it's no. This is tax fairness, not neutrality. I don't know. I'm gonna mix the two up.
That would be easy to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is how we're fair in today's world, but not being neutral, whatever it is.
That's
like
trying to tell the difference between
the same thing, but one is legal and one is not, right? So it's legal to raise taxes for one bracket and not for another. Anyways, all that to say, what do y'all think about just what you're seeing right here?
Well, quick question. This what you were looking at is like the percentage tax on their income, right? Like this is just the tax brackets.
Correct. Not the percentage of taxes paid, but the percentage on their income.
Because I actually have some numbers that I think is probably be worth throwing into this. So obviously you see the top 1% there has the highest tax bracket, obviously. Not only that, but they also basically pay for 46% of all federal income taxes. So
I'll scroll down here.
The top 1% in our country, they earn 26% of all income, right? So they earn a quarter, but then they pay for almost half of the federal government. So I'm just going to throw that out there. But Brian.
This graph actually kind of represents that, but obviously this is a little older. This is 2022, but it's closer to what you just said. Yes, this is showing 40% here. Obviously, it's a little higher now, like you said.
No, actually, maybe it's on the other direction because mine was older. Mine was from 2021.
Okay.
I'm pretty much I'm not for raising taxes. I mean, like this is disincentivizing making more money. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. Like that's backwards. And I think, but if you really look at it, like people who are in the top 1%, I mean, is this income tax? What about their business taxes? You have depreciation, you have write-offs, you have all kinds of things that you just show no income. Like Trump talks about how, he was wealthy. And if you remember the famous debate where Hillary said, well, he didn't pay any taxes, And he said, yeah, because I'm smart and all your donors do it too. And all your donors do the same. And you're not going to change it because they're the ones that gave you the money to be elected. And so now you could have done something about it for your 40 years. Anyway, it's kind of like, it's not an answer. Like it's not, it doesn't make sense. Like for me, it's just a platitude. And I'm surprised if that's coming from the right, because normally that's not something you hear, because that's normally something you hear from a leftist stage, from a speech, to say we're for the working man, even though they really do nothing for the working man.
Well,
so I'm against that.
What's crazy, Ryan, is not only is it coming from the right, but there's actually a huge debate happening right now among the Republican senators and congressmen. And the reason is because the GOP's traditional stance is the wealthiest Americans help create jobs, help raise overall living standards, and so they're burdened with less taxation because it's like that trickle down effect, essentially, right? But the GOP's base has shifted over the last 8 years. So this is what's crazy about it is there's a huge split now, and it's becoming evident between populists who want to tax wealthier Americans and the more traditional Republicans who believe across-the-board tax cuts are a formula for a broader prosperity. What we've seen is those who voted Trump into office this time around have shifted from more of the educated, college degree and higher income Americans to the no college degree and a lower income base. And so the Republican Party has shifted. So that's why you're seeing this is people are listening to the populists that voted them into power. The people are listening to, the voters, and the voters are saying, tax the wealthier Americans. So this we're looking at a shift in a party's agenda right now. That's what we're looking at.
It is.
And I appreciate that clarification. I mean, I think, I didn't get to do as much research for this episode because I spent too much time checking out all the filibustered exclusive content. So you got to go and watch that exclusive content right now on Locals. And so I'm glad now. Let's get back into this. So I think there's something like you see even in social issues like pro-life and all that, where there's some shifting happening. And just because a populace wants something doesn't mean you do it. It's not necessarily good for society. There needs to be some more voter engagement or whatever it is. But for me, there are some principles you just don't violate, and whether it's ethics or just a general principle, because too many times in government, we see this when I ran for office in 2020. You see government solving a problem for one people group or one specific time, and it creates problems for all kinds of other people groups, and 5 years down the road and 20 years down the road, and now you got 20 other things, and it's whack-a-mole instead of actually being educated, well-informed, and making decisions that make sense for the immediate term, for all people groups, for the short term, for the medium term and long term. Like, that is the way we need to do that. We need to see that. And that's where, for me, it makes sense to have somebody like Trump in there actually making decisions where you're thinking 10 years ahead, 5 years ahead, 1 month ahead, and you're doing what makes sense in the context of all of that. Now, I'm not saying we blindly trust him and all that and all this sort of stuff either, but I'm saying that there are general things that need to be working out in general economics and those kinds of things, and you have to take everything together. And we've talked, like you said, on other episodes about
which I agree. And I think that's what I'm trying to state is some of the things that are being said in the Republican Party, and even some of the things that Trump has said. So when they've asked him, what do you think? So this article headline, Republicans reconsider their commitment to tax cuts for the rich in Trump agenda bill. This is something they're actually talking about right now. Now, obviously that's coming from the left. That's NBC News. But when they asked Trump himself, what do you think about raising the tax on the 1%? And now, Ryan, you've already stated the obvious truth, which is they know how to get around taxes a lot of the time, right? Like they know how to dodge certain things depending on how where they put their money and all that kind of stuff. But that being not beside the point, but alongside the point, that they asked Trump, what do you think? And Trump said, I don't care if I wouldn't mind paying more taxes if it means that the people that are, that are working jobs for tips right now are able to keep those tips without getting taxed, or that those in lower income brackets are able to have more deductions. He said, I'd be happy to see that, and I'd be willing to pay more taxes. Now, obviously, that comes with the knowledge that Trump, traditionally, like most good businessmen, knows how to get around paying a big percentage of their taxes, but sometimes. But at the same,
Go ahead.
You brought us to this question. Can you cut taxes and actually raise revenue at the same time? That's the question. We're going to get into this, but first we're going to play a little game. So y'all, we're putting the question on the back burner. It's time to play a game, and we're going to play this game. Y'all ready for this? You ready? You didn't know you're going to be on a game show.
I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen.
All right. Here's the game show intro that I spent a lot of time working on.
Did you make...
All right, there you go. I'm not going to play it again. If y'all want to watch it again, you'll have to go back.
Oh, come on.
But it's time to play Name That Tax. Okay, so here's the rules of the game. And then we're going to answer this question. Can you cut taxes and actually raise the revenue at the same time? Okay, here's the rules of the game. If you think you know the answer, you've got to wait for me to finish asking the question, and then you've got to raise your hand. So I've got to see that first hand raise on the screen. I'm going to call on you first. If you get it wrong, I'm going to give the second hand raise an option to answer.
Are there prizes involved though? That's
the prize is you get to be named Tax Pro of the Week.
So fancy.
Hey, I got a call. I got to go, guys. So we'll see you. No, just kidding. Let's do this
for real. I thought you were for real. Okay.
No, I need to dial up the sarcasm, I guess.
Yes, a little bit. That'd be helpful. All right. So here we go. Here's the first question. You got to wait for me to finish asking the question. Raise your hand, and then I'll call on you. Who said, in this world, nothing is certain except death and taxes? I'll give you a hint.
Wait, I raised my hand. You're not looking at the screen.
It lagged. I saw your hand appear up there all of a sudden.
All right,
Reese.
My guess is Mark Twain.
Not Mark Twain. I'll give you a hint.
Minus 10 points.
I'll give you a hint. It was not a president, but it was a founding father.
Paine. Sorry.
Yep. Doug?
Thomas Paine.
Nope.
No? Dang it.
I'll give you another hint. Yeah, Reese?
Benjamin Franklin?
Yep, it's Benjamin Franklin.
Yes.
Nothing.
Nailed it.
Nothing
So now you're back to even.
Texas. All right, so 1 point for Reese. Y'all keep your own score.
Yes.
Oh, you don't get minus points for missing it?
I'll keep score.
No,
I'll
no,
keep
no,
score.
no, no, no.
Oh,
Hey,
okay.
nobody had an answer anyways. Okay, so here's the next question. In this movie, an IRS agent finds himself able to hear the narration of his own precarious story.
Oh,
Okay. Reese.
I know it. I know it. Can I say?
Yes, say it. Go.
Stranger Than Fiction.
You got it. 2 points for Reese. Man, Reese, you're killing it today. All right.
With
Dang.
we got three.
Close your Chat GPT window there, Reese.
I
Yeah,
don't.
Reese,
I don't have
you
it
got-
open. I've just seen the movie.
We got 3 more questions here. All right. What sci-fi comedy author wrote about one of his characters? He's spending a year dead for tax reasons.
Sci-fi comedy author.
I know this one too.
All right, Reese. What
Dang,
is it?
Reese.
That's impressive.
It's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I don't remember the name of the author though.
Douglas Adams. Douglas Adams.
Douglas
Good job.
Adams.
Okay.
Douglas Adams. Hitchhiker's Guide to the.
We got 2 more, and these are for bonus points. Okay, these count double. Ready? In what decade in the 1900s did the U.S. top income tax rate peak?
Top income tax rate peak.
I'll give you a hint. It's one of the yeah, Doug.
1980.
Nope.
I'll go with 60s.
Nope. I'll give you a hint.
Ah,
One of the wars was still happening in this decade.
40s.
Oh,
Yeah, it was the 40s.
that was my
nice
original.
job, Ryan.
1940. So the
Dang
top
it.
income tax rate reached above 90% from 1944 through 1963, peaking in 1944 when top taxpayers paid an income tax rate of 94% on their taxable income.
That makes sense because they were trying to fund the war, right?
Well, it was 94, and I think that was the year the war was over, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah, there is something. I don't know if I've heard that before because I've seen
But
a lot of
yes.
people on the left be like, "We used to have higher tax rates. Like, look, we had like up to 90% for the richest people." However, if you kind of look into it, there actually was enormous amounts of tax, like not loopholes, but like deductions and stuff.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
no one really paid that much.
No one really paid that much.
No
But
one
if-
actually paid that level because there was so many things that they could do to like reduce it essentially. But obviously,
exactly.
the base is extremely high still.
Okay, so that's 2
One
points
more.
for Ryan. Okay, right. Ryan, did you get that one? 1940.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, you got that one.
Last
Was it
question.
worth double?
What's the score? What's
The last 2 are worth double. So
harder
Reese-
question.
Okay, I have 3 points. Ryan has
Worth
2
double.
points because that one.
Ryan's got 2. Doug, you got to get this question and get some points. Okay,
I mean, I guess so.
this U.S. president cut taxes 3 times during his presidency while raising federal income revenue. And by the end of his time in office, only the wealthiest 2% paid any income tax at all. Ryan?
Reagan.
Nope. That's a good guess. That's a good guess.
Got to be early.
Oh man, no, actually, never mind. I had a thought. It's
I'll give
not
you a
right.
hint. His name is an alliteration. And it starts with C.
Calvin Coolidge.
Yeah, Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge. All right, Reese for the win.
Tax
Dang,
pro.
Reese.
Reese is the tax pro of the week. You're the winner of Name That Tax. I'm going to be sending you all of my taxes that I have to pay. And
Yay!
That's
so,
awesome.
More taxes for me.
so we're talking about this question: why cut, or how can you cut taxes and actually raise revenues? We've seen historically 2 presidents pull this off. The first one was Calvin Coolidge in a significant way. Like I said, 3 times during his terms, he cut taxes significantly and yet was able to raise the federal income revenue significantly.
Mhm.
The same thing happened in Reagan's term, where he cut taxes. And then not only did he raise the federal revenue, but over the next 2 decades after that, we saw one of the biggest economic booms in the United States that we've ever seen across the board. And they weren't just cutting taxes for the lower tax brackets, they were cutting taxes across the board. And actually, in major ways, Reagan cut taxes for not just the wealthier Americans, but also he cut taxes for the corporations as well. So here's the big question, because so when you look at this and you study this historically, why did that work, right? It's this idea of top down or this trickling method where you give people enough money at the top, essentially, or you give them enough of a tax break and let them keep enough of the money they actually earned. And then they're going to hire more people. They're going to be able to actually spend more money. They're going to boost the economy. Small businesses are going to make more money across the board. At least that's the idea. Now, there's a lot of pushback against this. And here's here's the main reason that people give. Why does this work? It's because incentives matter. And when people know I'm actually going to go out there and I'm going to make money and keep the money that I made, they're incentivized to make more money. They're incentivized to be more strategic. They're incentivized to start that next business, right? And to hire more people and to grow that next business. So there's this idea of if we tax people heavily enough, they're not incentivized to work. But if we really raise, take the taxes off, not just for one tax bracket, but for all tax brackets and even corporations or businesses included, there's this idea of an economic boom can come out of this. But here's the question I'm going to pose to y'all, and here's kind of the twist in this narrative, is this worked back in the day, but would the same thing work today? And here's the reason why. It's because we've seen a shift when it comes to people's belief about money and about work and about the hustling culture that we've never seen before. Because the boomers like to hustle, they like to grind, they like to work hard because that was what they grew up with. That was the culture. The millennials like to hustle in some ways less so, but in other ways even more so, to the extreme, to the I put myself in a a hospital because I was hustling too much, that kind of idea. But then what we're seeing from the Gen Zers and the Xers and the like is we're seeing this almost this complete and total turnaround where they're looking at the previous generations and saying, do I want to do the same things that I saw my parents' generation doing or my grandparents' generation doing? And are there more valuable things in life? So there's kind of this sentiment and this question that's out there, and they're looking at so the question for y'all is, do y'all think that this would work? Tax cuts across the board? Could we still raise the revenue in general? And would it work in our current environment and with the generations that we have today?
Well, I think it's a chicken and an egg issue, like which one came first kind of concept, because perhaps the generations now, the younger generations, aren't hustling because they know that, like, inherently they know that they're going to get taxed. And so maybe the boomers were more of a hustler because they actually kept more of their money and they saw the positive reinforcement benefit of that. But now these generations coming up into the workforce are seeing that, and maybe they don't even realize that that's the way that they're behaving. It could just be like an instinct to understand, well, like, the more I work, the more I have to pay, and the less money I get. Like, this is crazy. I need to go do something else. Like, so that's a big question. I think it is possible, but I think it's only possible with more government efficiency.
Yeah, I would say it's 100% possible. And I know some of that mentality you're talking about, the culture that's a little different, is a little bit from the participation award culture that we had for a while, which I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore. But I think 100%, if we're lowering taxes, like, you have corporations, big corporations that have a lot of money overseas, and they don't repatriate that money to invest in the US because they're going to be paid huge taxes on it. And so if you just, like Trump has talked about it, like a tax holiday, bring that money back and invest it. Yeah. And we've worked with companies that we're trying to put factories in the US. And then it's not just manufacturing though, but you have companies that want to invest. We've already seen this. We've talked about it on some of the other episodes. And so you need to cut regulations, and we need to have a market that is conducive to people wanting to invest in the US. And I watched a video this morning on AI and how these 7 AI things that you need to learn. And they talk about how AI is not really going to replace everybody, but it's people who know how to use AI will replace people who don't know how to use AI. Yeah. And so it's a question of, if you want to work 20 hours a week, then you can find an opportunity to do that. But the opposite of grinding and working 70 hours a week is not working 0 hours per week. It's finding another opportunity. And so that's where when we start to do all these things that we're talking about, you start the domino effect, and you start to have these other opportunities that are not just benefiting the financial elite, but are actually benefiting the middle of America, whether that's manufacturing or that's a remote job or whatever it is. But we need to have employers incentivizing them to be able to be investing and creating an atmosphere for that.
Yeah, and it's that the grind actually looks different too, because these younger generations, maybe they actually are working really hard, but they're working really hard on their TikTok. You know what I mean? That's
everybody wants to be a creator or influencer.
Yeah, and there's the promise of money in that, and so maybe the work ethic has shifted to a new platform that we kind of don't fully understand in the older generations. And the problem with that is that we have these generations who have been raised on technology, who only understand that as their life world, and so that's where they're heading, and they don't realize that not everybody can be a celebrity, and some of you are gonna have to just do the normal jobs.
I do think that's part of the issue. How I think to push back against the mentality, which you see a lot in the media, unfortunately, that just like the younger generations are just lazy, like lazier than like the older
I wasn't saying
generation.
that, just to be clear.
Which
don't think
I know that you guys aren't like specifically saying that, but there is a little
Mhm.
bit of this mentality that is out there that's like,
Yeah.
well, part of the reason is just because the younger generations are like lazier than the older generations. And I think it's really important to point out the fact that we talk about the boomers, that they lived through what arguably the most prosperous time and the massive, most economic boom in the United States, like the 80s, enormous, and the
Right.
90s, enormous economic boom. The younger generations have lived through economic decline after economic decline. You have like the 2008 2008 housing crisis, and then you have Obama's era and the shaky economy that occurred because of the massive, kind of like liberal policies that were occurring, and then you progressive policies, and then you have 2020 and COVID and
Right.
everything past that. And so there's actually, when you talk about people moving towards being like, everybody wants to be an influencer, everybody wants to be a mini celebrity or whatever. I think largely part of the reason for that, part of it, it's cultural, and social media is new,
Mhm.
and that's the cool thing now and all that. But part of it is honestly just opportunities. So we talk about, younger, like boomers back in the day could work a normal job and raise a family on a single income and buy a house. That
Yeah.
is nearly impossible to do today.
Right.
Literally nearly impossible. So like you talked about, like, why am I going to work so hard if all my money is going to be taken away with taxes? It's not just taxes. Why am I going to work so hard when I literally don't have the opportunities that
Yeah, good
previous
point.
generations had? If I'm working really, really hard and I'm not immediately rewarded,
Mhm.
or I'm
That's
not
a
soon rewarded, then
yeah. That
there's a damper on that. And that's part of the reason why so many young people do go the social media route, is because some of the only young people that are actually making lots of money are like YouTubers. And
Yeah,
TikTok
and I
well,
don't
like
blame them
that's
either.
where the
It's
money is. So they're trying
if
to
you can do
go.
it.
They're trying to
But
go
this
where
is
the money
all
is.
yeah. This is all related to government actions, like
It is.
the whole it's devaluing of the dollar, like printing more money. We went off the gold standard, and now you have inflation. You have all kinds of things that I mean, that is because of actions the government took. That's not because of anything inherent to society. That's because
No,
of
for sure.
actions the government. And so, but I do want to point out, Lou David, I don't know if you can put his comment up here about the phone being held 24/7.
Yeah,
Like
I saw that too.
this is such a good point. He says that it keeps anyone from hustling. And so, and growing up into adults, like having the phone scrolling all the time. Like, I don't know if I've done digital detoxes before, and it's like I got my deep thinking back. I got my ability to hold a thought and focus back. It's like I forgot what it was like, because we're just so, and it just zaps all it, like, because it's overload on the, what's it called, the receptors, where you're just
Dopamine
getting
receptors.
dopamine receptors all the time, and it zaps motivation and all that. And if it's not immediate
addictive.
gratification, so that's a part of it. It's not necessarily lazy, but I mean,
Mhm.
look at the way we do schools today. When I was in school, we had computers or in English lab and computer typing class, and maybe a programming class. Now they don't even have textbooks. They use literally technology for everything, and so
Smart boards.
it's literally they're sitting in front of a computer, or they have a Chromebook or whatever it is, because of all these silly excuses about money and all that. But anyway, I think that's a good point about we need to, there's many multi-factors in this, and I think that we need to take that into consideration as well. But we also need to create the environment for the things to come back and the things to flourish and all that as well.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Troy? You did the most research on this. Do you think that it is possible to cut taxes and have a good economy?
I think it is possible, but I think I landed on 2 points, which one of which Ryan mentioned and one of which you mentioned, Doug. And the first point is the businesses are going to have to increase the incentives for Gen Z and Gen X. Those are the ones that, so when I and I'm a millennial technically, I guess, but when I went and started researching jobs after getting out of school in 2012, I looked all around the country for jobs in my field, which was at the time marketing. And I landed on a company called HubSpot. And I said, this is the company I want to work for more than any other company in the world, even though I hate their liberal platform and their liberal beliefs. It's like I
Right.
don't agree with them, like their beliefs and those things that they're pushing, but their work environment sounds amazing. And the reason was because their job application was not a PDF that you download. It was a website that essentially sold you on the work environment. It was, they had pictures,
Do they have ping pong tables?
pictures of the work environment, ping pong tables. Exactly. They had latte machines. They had, it was casual dress code. It was set your own hours, come in whenever you want, like it was like, I was like, and the reason that attracted me was because that's how I work. I am not a scheduled person. I'm a very unscheduled and passion driven person. That's my personality, but I work very, very hard, but I work very hard on the things I'm passionate about. So if you can make it fun, and one of the things I'm passionate about is fun. Obviously we did the tax game today, but it's like, if you can make it fun and you can make it some place where I'm going to enjoy being, then I'm going to be able to focus on the things I'm passionate about and work very hard on those things. And obviously, there's a balance there. I'm not going to be passionate about every little thing I work on, but at the same time, eventually, obviously I decided not to apply because I didn't really want to work there. I didn't want to move, but at the same time that, like, I think back to that and I'm like, there's a reason why they got so many applicants, because everybody wanted to work there, right? Like everybody my age at that time wanted to work there. And so there's this need for employers to be educated about the younger generation, I believe, where we're not really going to incentivize them 100% with tax cuts. And the reason is because, and listen, and I'm not saying they're lazy. I don't believe they are, but obviously that's a case by case basis. But I believe that the younger generation, and one of the reasons they're on TikTok and that kind of stuff, is like, that was the other point, was like Doug said, like at some point people need to wake up to this reality of not everybody's going to be an NBA star. And there's other ways to actually make a living. And, and I believe that, in some cases, the younger generation needs to understand, hey, I can go start a business for myself, and I can actually do something I'm passionate about and put those passions to work, in a way that's not just going to generate revenue, but it's actually going to help people and it's going to like provide more opportunities for my own family, for other people's families, that kind of thing. So I think there's that solution there. But at the same time, back to what I was saying about the incentives, I believe the companies need to be better educated on how do we not make jobs suck so much, and I'm just thinking back to the work environment from like the 90s when I was a kid, watching like the adults work, and like walking around is like, man, this is the stalest place I've ever been in. The office setting was so bad. The cubicle setting is so bad. And my own experience in a cubicle, it's like, can we just take these things out to the parking lot and burn them, please?
Right.
Like there's got to be a better way to do this. And, and it's not just the environment and the look and stuff. It's like how you're treating people. It's it's like the motivations behind the work, all that kind of stuff. I feel like the younger generation has grasped this idea of, they've seen some of the failures of the work environment and even the hustle itself. There's a positive side to the hustle, and then there's a very negative side. Like I saw many people ruin friendships when I was young. I saw many older people ruin friendships and lifestyle opportunities by trying to sell things like Amway to all their friends, and then all their friends ran away. And it's like they were hustling. But guess what? They didn't make any money at it. The ones that I saw, they didn't make any money at it. And at the end of the day, they just lost out on friendships. And maybe they should have been spending their time doing something else besides trying to make an extra buck. So it's like, that's where I think the younger generation, Gen Z and X, they've kind of thrown out that idea. Like, we're not going to do that.
But unfortunately, I think it's a human condition.
Yeah, I mean, Troy, you gave an example of a good example of kind of like an office space, but like I worked in for a large corporation and I was helping develop suppliers, and that was in manufacturing. And so even in manufacturing, I agree, because you need to be aware of what people want. The biggest issue we had for the last 10 years or 8 years or so was labor. They couldn't find enough people to do the jobs. And what this one company did to solve it was they gave, like, it was these tough jobs, like in a forge shop or like a foundry or things that people didn't want to do. Well, what they found was that people like days off. And so they developed a new model where they could have 4 days on, working 10 or 12-hour days, and then 4 days off. And so people just loved having and they literally erased their turnover in one day
Mhm.
by
Yeah.
going to this new model. So that's just an example. There's others where
Mhm.
instead of the cubicles, you go to a shared workspace or that kind of stuff, or remote work or those kinds of things. But I'm in
Yeah.
a mastermind with some business leaders and ministry leaders. And last week, I literally gave the advice. I said, make a career plan for everybody in your company, because you want to know, first of all, are they planning to be with you long term, or is this a stepping stone into where they ultimately want to go? Or is it something, what is it? And it also helps them because you're investing in them. One of the companies I worked for, all of them really, they really invested in you. They wanted you to be able to take training. They wanted you to be able to go to the next level.
Mhm.
They wanted you to get to where you want to go. Obviously, it's still on you, but they work with you to create this plan. And so that's something that all companies can be doing and should be doing, because they're
Yeah,
investing in their employees. They're making them want to stay. They're creating that culture. And whether, they don't have to guess on whether they're going to be here for another 10 years or not, and whether they want many jobs or one job or whatever it is. So there's some creative ideas. So I think that's really a good point that you made there.
Yeah,
I think
it's
Go
I'll
ahead.
just to say I also had my own experience for working for a tech company, and it was post COVID, or it was during COVID, I should say. It was during COVID when I first started working for them. And so initially my job, I was working in office 1 day a week and at home 4 days a week. And there was evidence that our department was actually more more efficient doing that. Like people were getting more work done doing that, because part of the reason was because they're not surrounded by their coworkers all the time and walking around and talking to people like in their cubicle and trying to break up the monotony of the day. And the other part of the reason is just because it's like some people could just be more productive, like at their house. This is one thing I've seen this is one thing that's kind of annoyed me is I like the younger generations, they understand there's more to life than just work, because we did see like our parents working like insanely crazy. And we do know that, like, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. The
Dying 5 years after they retire.
we are more productive now than we've ever been before because of technology. Because of technology, we actually can get more done than we've ever gotten done before. However, our wage and what our wages can buy has been declining. And it's just like, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't, there's something broken in the system. And the left would say it's one thing. The left will say, well, it's greedy businesses, whatever. The right will say, oh, well, government is spending too much money and there's too many taxes. I think there's probably lots of different reasons. I lean more towards the conservative answer. Is like, okay, yeah, probably too many taxes, probably that kind of stuff. But it's one of those, it points to the younger generations are like, there's this broken system where I don't want to work 60 hours a week in a dark cubicle for my entire life. Like, I want a better life than that. And it was something that's annoyed me, is a lot of the conservative voices have taken the stance of like, oh, suck it up, go back into the office, yeah, we're cutting work from home, you just have to deal with it, just go and work harder. And I'm just like, wait, we had an opportunity to make people's lives better, allowing them to work from home. People that can work from home, they get to spend more time with their kids, they get to take care of their house more, they get to do some chores in between like meetings and stuff, and then like they have more time on the week. It's one of those things where it's just like, no, hold on a second. If we want happy employees who are productive for like the entirety of their lives, is like, why are we not trying to do things that make it easier and make things better? And that's a whole separate side conversation that we could have more about, like work culture. But that's one of the things that I really had to cringe at when I see some conservative voices just being like, no, work culture just has to stink. And it always has to stink. And it's just like, no, it doesn't have to stink. It could be better.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why you're losing young people, is because you refuse to make it better. But
can I give a specific example of that from something that happened last year? So August 29th, 2024, it was reported that a woman was found dead in her cubicle 4 days after last clocking in. This was in Tempe, Arizona, at a Wells Fargo corporate office. This employee was found dead in her cubicle 4 days after she scanned into the building. So what happened was she died in her cubicle, and then nobody checked on her for the next 3 days after that.
Wow.
So she was so isolated in her cubicle in the work environment that she did not talk to anybody for 3 days after that. And I mean, obviously that like points to like isolation at home and all that kind of stuff as well.
Right. Yeah.
But the same problem. The problem is very, very evident that not only was her situation isolated in the sense of like she didn't work with other people, but her location in the office obviously was isolated enough that nobody saw her laying there dead, like sitting there dead,
Right.
for 3 days. So it's just a very specific example of how bad, obviously that's an extreme, but how bad it could get in corporate America. And I think that's one of the reasons why, and one of the things that Gen Z and Gen X is trying to avoid, is I don't want to, because it's kind of a metaphor for and a picture of the life that they're trying to avoid. I don't want to, not only do I not want to die there, I don't want to live there for the rest of my life, and then die there. It's like, so I don't know, it can get really bad.
Yeah, I have to give a quick soapbox here, like from just a biblical perspective or theological perspective. Like I did my PhD in biblical studies, and my dissertation was on the role of work in the lives of Christ followers. And so it's how we were created in God's image to work. Like work existed before the fall, and God's a worker. And so it's not it shouldn't be a 4-letter word. It shouldn't be a negative thing. It should be something that we see positively. Like my podcast is called Cutting Edge Faith. Originally, it was called Your Faith at Work. And it was to help people see their calling and help people partner with God and what they're doing, what they were created to do. That doesn't mean your whole life is about work, but that means that, like when people retire, like look at the research on this. When people retire and then they like go into a life of leisure, they deteriorate and they start to die more quickly.
Yeah.
So we have to have something driving us. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be a 90-hour week, but at the same time, if people are complaining about what a CEO makes, but they're not willing to go travel 50% of the time and give up a lot of their life, then they, okay, then that's not for them, but I just think,
what kind of work is a CEO actually doing? Like, that's the difference. Yeah. No, you raise a really good point, Ryan. And I 100% agree with you. Work is part of life. We were meant to work, we're meant to work hard, and it definitely, we can derive some sort of sense of purpose or at least meaning out of our work, or at least it's supposed to be attached to that. But I think it's very evident that there's good versions of work, and then there's not so good versions. There's good amounts of work, and there's not good amounts of work. Yep. I can honestly say the highest like mood swings in my life, and like the most difficult or best experiences of my life have probably been in one way or another attached to my work, whether that was a good experience or not. So I think that's definitely there. But yeah,
everything goes in seasons too. And I think that one of the things that is difficult with the workforce concepts in general from generation to generation is that we have to recognize that life isn't about doing one thing for the rest of your life, unless that's your personality. And so when it comes to that retirement age, work just looks different, And everybody has a different idea of what that is. And I don't know if earlier, Troy, when you were saying Gen X and Gen Z, I don't know if you meant Gen X or not, because Gen X is a little bit, I
think you meant millennials. I think you meant Gen Z and millennials, like the younger generation. Gen X is above millennials, but
Gen X is in between boomers and millennials.
Oh, my bad. Yeah, I've got the whatever's after Gen Z.
I think it's a good point. Like, even get rid of work-life balance idea. It's work-life management. You said seasons, Doug. So it's kind of like, what season are you in? You just need to be intentional about it. If you want to be retired.
I meant Gen Alpha. Sorry. Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, below Gen Z. Gotcha.
I meant who's coming after Gen Z, Gen Alpha. Yeah. Sorry.
Gotcha.
So if anybody wants to retire and then they want to go and spend their time working on a lake house or working on a boat or taking care of grandkids, taking them to ball games, more power to them, and if that's what it is, but it's not going to be this retire and go sit on a beach and then it's unfulfilling.
But that's going to be difficult. Either one of those options is going to be difficult if the taxes keep going up and if we can't get this under control. And
now we get back to
there's no economic opportunities.
So,
the problem is that we're so heavily taxed and burdened in general financially that once you get to that retirement age, you actually can't stop working, but you have to go find a job that isn't even what you really want to be doing. Like, who wouldn't want to get paid to go, refurbish a boat to go out on the private lake that you live next to? That'd be amazing, but that's just not practical.
One thing I wanted to make this point I forgot to make earlier is if I know a guy who has millions and millions and millions of dollars invested, like in one day, he went up $20 million in the market or down 80 million in one day. I would give that guy money to do what he wants to do, like manage this money for me. I will give it to him to do that. I will not give money to somebody who is a drug addict and have all kinds of problems. And every time they get another dollar, they got another. That is what giving more money to our government is. Like, are you giving it to the investor, or is it an addict that doesn't know how to handle money? So that's what I'm saying is like, no, I'm sorry. More taxes is never going to be the answer with our government. They waste way too much money. They've shown they don't know how to manage anything. It's disgusting. And so no way.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I know who you're talking about, Ryan, and I would say he definitely strikes me as the type of guy who knows how to create a positive work environment
Mhm.
around himself. So,
Yeah.
anyways, so okay, so I want to finish on this because we're at 55 minutes here. So we're coming back around to the same question: is how do we cut taxes? How do we make this work? Obviously, Trump administration is saying tariffs are going to at least help. But one of the things Trump has said is, he believes tariffs could potentially completely allow us to scrap income tax. 2 months ago, he in some ways kind of vowed to scrap income tax. Not sure if he's still there now, but he did mention from 1870 to 1913 there was no income tax, and that's it's almost true. There was no official income tax. We had a little bit at the start of the Civil War, but not a lot. It did not officially start until 1913, and during that period of time, we had the highest tariffs that we've had, and essentially tariffs across the board. And they were paying for the Civil War. Obviously, they were paying for everything in early America, and they have historically been able to essentially help build the United States. They're one of the pillars of the American system that allowed rapid development, allowed the industrialization of the United States. So very interesting looking back. And so we've got this article. I'm not going to take the time to go through it, but if anyone's interested in what the White House is putting out right now, tariffs work, and President Trump's first term proves it. And so now, obviously, this is bias coming from, they're trying to essentially back what Trump is doing right now. But I think there's some really good information in there, and actually going and looking at the studies is worth doing. You can make that decision for yourself whether or not you agree with them. But that's what they're trying to do. Is they're trying to use the tariffs essentially to cut. So if y'all are interested in more tariff episodes, we talk about the tariffs, whether they're good or bad, in a couple of our previous episodes. I'll link that below. Don't forget, there's exclusive content on YouTube now. There's also exclusive content on Locals. Y'all can go sign up for a small monthly fee. It's a little more expensive on YouTube than it is on Locals. And you can get access to that. We're posting one exclusive episode a week, and sometimes we'll even do an uncut version of our other episodes. You can get the full conversation, sometimes video, sometimes audio. What we talked about this last week was the vaccines. So I'm always hesitant to say that word on YouTube. But
Cancel.
yeah, the oh my gosh, something just flashed on my screen as soon as I said that. They're watching. They're definitely watching. I'm not even kidding. That was weird. But I will say this for YouTube members, and I meant to say this at the beginning, but we'll post it again later. The vaccine episode is not on YouTube because we're afraid of getting canceled, and so we put it on Locals, and we actually made that exclusive episode open to everyone this week. So even if you're not an exclusive member, I would say after we're done live streaming here, go over to Locals, sign up for a free account, and you get access. Even if you're not a paid member, you're going to get access to that vaccine and /RFK/health, decisions that are being made right now for the American people, all that kind of stuff. You're going to get access to that full hour-length episode for free. And so you can kind of get a little sneak peek of the exclusive content, and this week only, and on Locals. And then you can decide, do I want to sign up for this? And you can sign up for exclusive content either on YouTube or on Locals. It's available in both places normally. So any closing comments on what we talked about today?
I've got a pretty big one. Closing comment, and this kind of goes into some of the stuff I brought up earlier. But talking about this 3% potential increase on the highest income earners, essentially people that make more than $1 million. And it is crazy to hear the Republican Party talking about this, and they're arguing. And there's Republicans that are like, how are we even talking about this? We're Republicans. We always talk about cutting taxes. We can't talk about raising taxes on the richest. I just want to pointing out that it's honestly, it's a little scary because this is actually a sign of empire or kingdom decline, you could say, that like throughout history, when civilizations or empires start to decline, one of the signs of it is the tax burden is moved from being spread out across the entire population to being moved to only like the very wealthiest people. And part of the reason is because of the populism that we talked about earlier. As the economy gets worse, and there's different kinds of conflict, then you always have these populist movements that are like, oh, let's tax the absolute richest people, that they can pay for everything, or they're blaming the richest people for the way that the world is, and so taxing them is a way to get back at them or whatever. And it's one of the many signs of a kind of like empire in decline or in coming into collapse, is essentially like across the board, we're no longer just taxing everybody like an equal-ish amount. Now we're only taxing the very rich, and it is one of those things. It's like I don't think it's a good idea. Like again, as the stat I brought up earlier, the highest income earners are already paying for almost half of the government, like 40 to 46% or whatever it was of the government is being paid by them. So we're going to make them pay a little bit more. Like eventually they just leave the country. Eventually they find ways to no longer have to pay those taxes, or they just stop creating as many businesses and stuff like that. And my second point is just that democracy is really difficult because, like, again, my point about the possibility of us needing to raise taxes is not because I want to raise taxes. And to Ryan's point, like, yeah, giving the government more money doesn't sound like a good idea when we need to be cutting money. I get that. I honestly agree with that. However, it's the notion of which one are we going to do? Are we actually going to cut? Are we going to cut Social Security? That's going to be unpopular. We're going to cut Medicaid. That's going to be unpopular. When you have a democracy, you can't do unpopular things because you get voted out of office. And so the Republicans are between a rock and a hard place. If they have to pay for things, they have to pay for things. They either raise taxes, which is going to be unpopular, or they cut huge amounts of programs that a lot of people like. And both of those are going to end up being unpopular, and it's going to make it difficult for them to get literally anything done. So that's my, not to end on a pessimistic mood, but that's kind of where my headspace is right now.
So I want to comment on Kevin's comment here. I don't know if we can bring that up here, but first I would say that, when Troy said the person that we know, we were talking about the investor, not the drug addict. So I just want to clarify that. Now, when we see here, the middle class is disappearing. That's what this Kevin says is Gen Z, and it's a choice of being wealthy or poor. And this is true in the U.S. The middle class is absolutely disappearing, and that is in large part, in part, to do with decisions that our government has made over decades and decades. And the middle class opportunities are disappearing, all kinds of issues here. And so we see how important it is that our leaders are making the right decisions. And now having content like this and many other networked, more of a networked society and not a top-down media society, we have opportunity for people to be more informed and pushing leaders to keep them accountable. And so people have no idea how they can just reach out to their representative, whether it's a state representative or Congress. And if a state representative or senator has 5 people or 10 people reach out to him on a topic or her, that's like a lot. Like then they can go and take action on it. And so find out who your representative leaders are and call them, go see them, and actually visit them. And so make sure you have your voice heard. And so that's what we need to be doing. We have a problem in America of a disengaged electorate. Like that is really what's going on. And we're just getting on Twitter and talking about things instead of taking action, or maybe even running for office and that sort of thing. And so I just want to encourage people to make sure you're engaged and to be encouraged that, God did create you to work and to do that in a way that brings glory to him and do things that honor him. And so it doesn't need to be a thing you dread. You can keep going towards something that you want and desires that he's put in your heart. So, all right. I enjoyed that. My little final soapbox for today.
Doug, what do you think? Any closing thoughts?
I think on that same comment, the idea that the middle class is disappearing, it is. That's absolutely correct. And I do agree that Gen X and millennials have been able to enjoy the benefits of the middle class, but we also are seeing it rapidly disappear. I think we're all millennials here, and we are feeling the pain of it too. Maybe not quite as distinctly as the younger generations. I'm not sure because I'm not in that generation, but we're seeing it. And my hope and my encouragement is that we are actually trying to change that for the better. Yeah,
I think that's good. Nope. Great thoughts, y'all. Thanks for a good episode. I think that's a wrap. So, again, if y'all missed out on the tariff discussions, those are going to be on the channel. You can go watch the previous live streams. And if you're interested in exclusive content, it's available both on YouTube and locals. That's it. That's all for today. That's the episode. So tell your friends, put out some flyers, and we'll see you next week.
I'm going to make a trophy for my win today, for my quiz win.
Awesome.
I get the participation trophy.
Thanks, bro. Yes.
It's a medal.